Okay, welcome to another edition of Political Science Fun Time with me, your host, Professor Selby. This video is on one of the most important and unique rules in California's system of governance. It's known as Prop 13. Okay, um, it's just so important for you to have a good handle on how Prop 13 affected California. Whether you love it or don't love it, I don't care. It's important for you to have a good set of facts that are research based on how Prop 13 is working. Okay, so let me start with a little bit of background, sort of set things up for us, and then I'll turn to an analysis of the rule itself and sort of how, what are some options of reform today, right? So a lot of this unit, this California politics unit, it's based on, well, let's look at what's happening. And then, what do you think as an individual? What's your sort of preferred solution in the long term for, making California sort of operate better? Okay. Um, so, um, so the background, through the 1970s, um, property taxes were going up quite significantly. Okay, California was getting a lot bigger. There was actually a lot of inflation through the 70s. This is for like complete other reasons, but there was a lot of inflation, a lot of price inflation in the 1970s. So things cost more. Governments need to pay more to get things done. In turn, they need to raise taxes. In turn, people get annoyed. Okay. And, in tandem with that, there was also some very prominent cases of guys who are called assessors. Guys who are assessors, what they do is they literally drive around almost like Google cars or like taking pictures and stuff. And they like look at your property and they look at the neighborhood and they determine if your property value has gone up or down. And if it goes up, you pay a little bit more because you pay based on market price. And if it goes down, you pay a little bit less because you pay on market price. Well, market price was also jumping up really fast at the time, right? So people's property taxes were going up quite significantly for a variety of reasons. And Prop 13 was part of what we call the tax revolts, which continued all the way through, maybe even to today, right? This sort of tax and cut, or cut taxes and cut spending sort of like approach to governance. Which, I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But like that, this is what's happening, right? Um, One of the interesting things about how America works and also how things worked in California pre Prop 13 was that local property taxes were one of the main funding revenues for schools. Okay, so your local school is funded by people who live in the area, so their taxes go to their school. But what's the unintended consequence of that? Well, wealthy areas that have wealthier houses have more money for their schools. Poorer areas with less expensive houses have less money for their schools. And that's actually kind of a pretty big problem, right? I mean, if anyone deserves help, good schooling, it's someone who doesn't have a big advantage off the, at the beginning. And there was an important Supreme Court case called Serrano v. Priest, which mandated some sharing of resources between school districts. Well, the rich people weren't super excited about that. Taxes had been going up, so it's like another factor that kind of got bundled into the background of Prop 13. And a gentleman by the name of Howard Jarvis, who founded a group called the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association that even today is still a major player in California politics. He conceived of Prop 13. It was kind of like his brainchild, okay? And it passed. It definitely passed, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, what did Prop 13 do? Okay, it did two things. Prop 13 did two things. First, it imposed a 2/3 supermajority rule on all new taxes in California. There are some small exceptions, okay? Like bonds are not taxes because you're borrowing money rather than taxing, so that's just not a tax, it's a bond. Fees are mostly exempt because fees, again, are not taxes, they're a fee for a service, things like that. There's a few other sort of like small carve outs. But quite clearly, a supermajority rule like that makes it harder to raise taxes, right? That was the goal, right? Let's make it harder to raise taxes. Now, that part of the rule is not that big of a deal. Like, yes, it's hard to raise taxes. It helps to keep taxes low. So if you like low taxes, then great, totally get it. But it's a relatively, there's not a ton of unintended consequences. The second thing that Prop 13 did have a lot of unintended consequences, and that's the part that most people sort of like either love or complain about today. So leave it up to you whether you love it or hate it. The truth is, like, the truth should be somewhere in the middle on this one. But it's not my job to tell you what to think. It's my job to show you like the evidence for what's going on in the world. Okay. Okay. uh, let's see. Okay. The second part of the rule did this. Okay. So it changed how property taxes were levied. Okay. Levied means applied. It changed it from a market price system, right? Remember I said, oh, like your house is worth more, you pay more in taxes. It goes down, you pay less in taxes, right? Market price is market price, and you pay taxes based on market price. It switched that, and that's how almost all other states do it. There's a few others that do it the way California does, but it switched it to a purchase price system. So what does that mean? It means the amount of money you spent when you bought a property, it gets locked in, right? And it's allowed to go up 2% a year, but no more than 2%. Okay. And if you follow property generally appreciates between 5 and 9% a year, like on average. So it's a little bit of a leeway, but if the value of your property is going up 5 to 9%, but you're only paying taxes based on a 2% increase, quite quickly there becomes a big divergence between what you pay taxes on and how much your property is actually worth. Okay. And that's the part that a lot of people sort of, complain about, because it really is a perfect example of the lock-in effect. When Prop 13 was passed in 1978, nobody thought that that a house that was worth 50 grand in 1978 was going to be worth $1 million today. But as a matter of fact, almost all of those houses that were worth 50 grand in 1978 are worth $1 million today or thereabouts. Like, no one pictured things going as far as they did. Okay. So that's an unintended consequence. Let me explain to you how the new purchase price system works. I kind of mentioned this already, but it's important to wrap our brains around it. First, you take 1% of the price of your house the year of purchase, right? So if you purchased your house for $300,000 last year or 10 years ago, then that 1% would be $3,000. Okay. So $3,000, that becomes what's called your base value. Base value just means that's how it starts. And you had some additions on top of the base value, but not that much. Okay. And then each year, no more than 2% increase to base value. And sometimes it is less. Okay. So during the Great Recession, a lot of localities decided not to put a 2% increase onto base value, things like that. Well, what does this mean in real life, right? Let's think about, IRL, as the kids say these days. What does this mean in real life? Well, let's take an example. Let's say you bought your first home in Los Angeles just before the passage of Prop 13. How much money were you likely to pay on that house, right? So let's just think for a minute. Let's say it's a 3-bed, 2-bath house, medium-sized lot, San Fernando Valley, which in the 70s was the suburbs, but now it's 405 where it hits the 101. It's kind of like pretty close to some key parts of LA. How much did you spend on that house? 100,000, 200,000? The answer is actually 60,000 or less. Okay, so 60 grand is a little bit of a high price for 1978 for this house. But there you go. Let's just take 60 grand. So you paid $60,000 for your house, and Prop 13 locks in that tax base, locks in your base value based upon a $60,000 valuation. Let's calculate your property tax if you still own the house today. Your base value on that property tax is $600. In 1979, a 2% increase on 600 is $12. So now you're at $612. Then you get another 2% increase. So it's a 2% increase on 612. So $624.24, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't have time to sit here and just like do all that math. There's some elegant formula for it, but I don't know what it is. And your 2020 tax base will be approximately $1,300. Now, let's ask, how much is that house worth today? I mean, I already gave you the answer, so, but I'm not going to go back and re-record, right? Well, that house is close to $1 million today. It's definitely very close to $1 million. How do I know? The house that I'm speaking of is the house that I was born in, the house that my parents just sold, and they purchased it actually for $57,000, and they just sold it for $880,000. And what do you think the gentleman who purchased that property is doing with it? He's tearing down the house and putting up this like 4-story mansion, right? Because he's got $1 million to just plunk down in cash. You know, he's got a lot more over that. So he's putting in probably about $2 to $2.5 million into that property. You know, this old, terrible house is just going away. And we drive by it when we go to LA, we like drive by it and we talk about like growing up there and stuff. It's like that whole kind of thing, right? Um, but like that's $1 million teardown. Just think about that. It's $1 million teardown. Wow, that should really kind of shock your mind, right? And whoever purchased that property, let's say he was going to live in it. Once he builds on it, his tax rate's going to go even higher because he's building on it. But then it'll be 1% of whatever that valuation is once it's built, and then it'll be locked in forever at that point, right? So when there's a transfer of property, or if you add on to your house, you pay. It doesn't all get revalued, but in this case, this is a tear down and rebuild. It's just like a new property tax rate, right? Um, but let's say you bought exactly the same house right next door to my parents' house, right? You paid $880,000. You just bought it that year as opposed to my parents who've had it for 50 years. And how much taxes are you going to pay? Well, what's 1% of $880,000? $8,800. Okay, so what did we just learn here, kids? Let's think about it. What did we just learn here? Okay, what we learned is that if you've had a property for a long time in California, you're getting a sweetheart deal on your property taxes, and the longer you've had it, the more of a sweetheart deal it is. And if you just purchased, you're actually paying taxes close to market value. If you just purchased, you're paying at market value. If you purchased last year, you know, it probably went up a little bit, etc. My wife and I bought our house about 5 years ago. It's gone up about 20%. Okay, so a little bit. Well, so we haven't been quite at that 5 to 9%, but it's gone up pretty good. So we're getting a decent benefit now from Prop 13, but you know, not as much as my neighbor who purchased in 2010 during the Great Recession. Housing prices were incredibly low at that point. She's making out. Her house has tripled in value, and she's paying property taxes on 1/3 of the value of her house. I mean, good for her. I'm happy for her, but it's not necessarily good for everybody else. Okay. Now, Howard Jarvis himself, or his taxpayer association, they estimate that the average tax savings over a lifetime is about $250,000 or about $6,000 a year today, which is very close to those numbers I gave you with my parents' house, right? So my parents might have been getting like a slightly better deal than maybe your average person, but I mean, you know, that's a lot of money, you know what I mean? And California state government can use that money, although we're getting money from other places. So let's look at this piece of evidence here, right? This is from the LAL Legislative Analyst's Office. Owners in the same neighborhood face very different tax burdens, right? So some people are paying, the darker you are, the closer you are to market rate. The lighter you are, the further away you are. So if you're more like white, you're paying about 1/5 or to 1/10 of market rate on your taxes. You're getting a sweetheart deal, okay? This is what I was explaining about market value and assessed value diverging through time. Now, what's happening here? This was the housing crash, right? But notice this is 2015. It only took crashed in 2008, 2009. By 2012, it was taking off again. So it's like, call it 4 or 5 years. Housing prices go down, but even then, even after that crash, it was only half. You were still paying half. That's the lock-in effect right here, right? Like you see it start at the beginning, This is right after Prop 13 passed. There wasn't a huge appreciation in the late 80s. Housing started to take off. Little mini recession through the 90s, a little bump. And then California really, Silicon Valley and all that completely boomed. Another crash, little up and down, little up and down. And now we're a little bit higher because it's 2020. So we're about up there. So, what's Professor Selby's number one rule? Never sell property in California. Don't do it. Turn that extra house into a rental. This is my wife and I. We're saving up, praying to be able to sneak into something a little bit bigger. We don't know if we're going to be able to do it because housing prices have been going up so fast. We got into this. It's kind of like a good starter house. We got into our starter house. When are we going to be able to move up to our, retirement home? Well, it might not be till the kids are out of college, man. We're gonna have to save for a long time, or we're kind of waiting for another recession housing crisis because we're savers, so we save a lot of money. But I mean, it's not going to be easy for us to move up right now. Okay. Now, some of the consequences here from Prop 13, some of them are like just more um, like sort of political consequences. Prop 13 was like one of the first times that a really, really, really big thing happened at the ballot box. And we had done some other stuff, but people hadn't really gotten savvy to how powerful the initiative system could be in California. And then after Prop 13, just like this boom in initiatives that are raising or lowering taxes, changing budgeting, how the budget is working, changing this, changing that. Now California's budget is a complete disaster. And this is not really Prop 13's fault. This is more just direct democracy's fault. But California's budget is super unwieldy because it's all these special monies going every which way but loose. And really, it's like just like doing a family budget. Like, okay, we're going to carve out money for our mortgage. Maybe that's like education if you're a government. We're going to carve out money for, we want to go on vacation, so we're going to put this money away on vacation. You carve out for your bills and other stuff, and then the rest of it, it's like groceries, etc. And you just kind of like pay what you need. You know what I mean? And then hopefully save some for retirement. Okay. Now, oh, did I miss the shift? Oh, okay. So I'll talk about this later. I'll need to fix this. Um, let's see. Yeah, so you'll see it right here. So not already discussed. I apologize for that. This is to be discussed. But okay, so let's talk what did Prop 13 really do? Well, it is true California definitely has lower taxes than we would otherwise. I think that's probably more a result of the two-thirds rule than the property tax rule, though, because point number two is when property tax revenue gets just turned off at the spigot quite that severely, the government just has to go to other revenue sources. Okay. So what do? You raise income tax and you raise sales tax and you raise fees and you borrow a little bit of money. Okay. And you cut education. Education took a big hit. And then you also have a strong difference in property tax rate between new and old property purchasers. That's the information I just show you right there. Now, let me talk about point number two for a minute, because everyone likes to talk about, oh, California's taxes are, the taxes are too dang high, blah, 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 blah. Okay, like I get it if that's how you feel. But what it led to was a significant restructuring in California's tax base. Okay. So California has below average property tax rates, but high property values. Before Prop 13 was passed, so it also caused a shift between burden of property tax from businesses to individuals. Okay. So now it used to be businesses paid a little bit more of the total share of property tax, and now that's individuals. California has some of the highest rates of income taxes for upper income households and one of the lowest rates for lower income households. So, the income tax is kind of interesting here. It's what we call progressive tax. High earners pay more. But even high earners, the federal tax is way bigger than what they're paying in state tax. So keep that in mind. California has also the highest state sales tax in the nation, but taxes few services compared to other states. So there's quite a few carve outs from the sales tax in California. Um, our business taxes are about average overall. So I know people talk about, oh, the taxes are so high, but our business tax average are about average nationwide. Okay. And our economy is great. I mean, under COVID, obviously it hurts, but if you look at the recovery from the economic recession, California is about 12% of the population of the nation, but we created somewhere around 20% of the jobs. So we're way overperforming on that rate. But we collect revenue much differently, right? It restructured California's tax base. We rely more on income and sales tax and less on property tax, and that's one of the unintended consequences of Prop 13, right? Um, And just to give you the short of it, because Prop 13 so strongly limited the amount of property tax that could be collected, California had to look for other sources of revenue, and that meant mostly income and sales tax, plus a few other things. Um, so I already talked about how Prop 13 led to more budgeting at the ballot box, so we can leave that. What are some of the unintended effects of Prop 13? Well, the first one is that most of the tax savings go to high income households. Wealthy people benefit more than middle class and lower class people under Prop 13. Why? Well, so according to the LAO, more than 50%, so half of the tax savings from Prop 13 go to households with $120,000 or more in annual income. Okay. And basically, the logic is really simple. You have more money, you buy a bigger house, it goes up faster, you're less likely to have to sell it. And so then you have it longer, its appreciation increases more quickly, and you just end up having a greater benefit from the law. Now, if you want to help rich people, like, great, let's do that. But that's kind of weird. Like, it's like, well, if it's your grandma, totally get it. You're on a fixed income, totally get it. But I don't think it certainly wasn't sold as a way to help rich people. Let's put it that way. It's supposed to help regular average people. Um, uh, prop Secondly, Prop 13 is part of the housing crisis in California, but only a part. Okay, so be very clear about that. It's one of the top 4 or 5 major factors, probably top 3. Then it depends who you ask with how they're going to rank it. Um, but one of the main reasons it's part of the housing crisis is because of Selby's #1 rule: never sell property in California, right? You have it forever. You end up getting a really cheap property tax bill. You rent it, and now you're making profit and paying cheap taxes all at one time. Well, so you're never going to sell that house. What that means is that there's a restriction on housing supply. Prices go up, but no one can get in, right? And that's kind of the problem that's happening there. Um, so again, and then secondly, there's a second thing. So not only has it reduced housing turnover, but undeveloped or underdeveloped land, Prop 13 creates a disincentive to develop that land. Okay. Why? Again, you're paying a really cheap property tax. So basically, if it's so cheap and you can just, there's like a little tiny little house on it, you rent it, or um, it's like just like a pumpkin patch for a month a year and a Christmas tree lot for a month a year, but that's enough to cover the bills. Maybe you just decide that's fine for you, um, uh, because you're paying so little in property tax. If you had to pay market value on that property tax, it creates an incentive to develop. Well, I want to make some profit off this thing. I'd better build 4, 6, 8, 10 apartment units, put up a warehouse, put up, whatever you're going to put up. Better to develop the land, get higher rent from it, make more profit. Okay. Um, so this again, most of this research is straight from the LAO, which is the Legislative Analyst's Office. Similarly, vacant land is much less likely to be developed the longer it has been owned. The chance that land was developed drops significantly the longer the property is owned. properties owned for 5 to 10 years were 4 times more likely to be developed than properties owned for 20 or 25 years. So just think about that. That's like, if you bought something 20 or 25 years ago, only 2% of those properties are being redeveloped. Almost all of those really, not all, but like there's so much vacant land that really should be developed in California. And then lastly, education, especially higher education, faced one of the largest cuts in funding. Okay. This one is not all Prop 13's fault either. It's a complicated world out there. There's a lot of factors that go into anything. But the budget crunch that resulted from the limitation of property tax was a major factor in increasing student fees in higher education. Okay. And California is now falling behind on per capita spending in education K to 12. Okay. Um, so I got some sites here for you, etc. Um, Now let's look back and do a quick debrief. Wow, Professor Selby, you just threw a bunch of information at me. I'm not sure how to internalize all of it. You might need to rewatch this video again. Highly recommended. Um, but let's just kind of take a look at it now from, sort of like, what do people say and how do people think about it? One might think that, well, Prop 13 has kind of had these unintended consequences. Maybe we should just get rid of it. I understand why you feel that way. While theoretically possible, it's super unlikely to happen because Prop 13 is one of the most cherished elements of California's system of governance, with nearly 2/3 of California residents saying that its beneficial effects outweigh its downsides. Okay. So be careful. Politicians who try to change or modify Prop 13 are frequently punished electorally, either by losing themselves or having whatever initiative defeated. And sometimes it's called the third rail of California politics. The third rail is like in BART, it's the electrified rail. What happens if you touch it? You're going to get shocked. Okay. So, there we go. Um, and what's interesting here is both supporters and detractors of Prop 13 are basically looking at the same evidence. They're just having different valuations of it, right? Remember our lesson here of values in science, right? Um, like everyone's agreeing about what the consequences of Prop 13 are. It's just some people say like, look, I like low taxes, and so I like Prop 13. And other people are like, well, we need to fund, reasonably social services, state services and stuff. And Prop 13's been a little bit problematic, so maybe we should do something about it. Okay. Um, a lot of conservatives are like, oh, Prop 13 is the only thing saving California. I don't buy that. And liberals are like, oh, Prop 13's everything wrong with California. I don't buy that. Okay. So, both sides on this one, they're kind of like half truths. Like, is it true that Prop 13 has kept taxes a bit lower than they would be otherwise? Yes. But I don't think the people who pushed Prop 13 intended or foresaw some of these, the fact that more of the money goes to high earners, the fact that it's affected our housing market negatively. They didn't want to do that. So, while they were coming from a place that I really recognize, hanging on to that while you have these like pretty clear negative consequences and like, okay, like let's fix that. But the people on the left, their problem is you actually can fix Prop 13 or tinker with it, say call it tinker with it, without just junking it, right? And people really do like Prop 13, no matter what you say about the fruits and nuts in California. Everyone else in the rest, like if you go to Texas, the only fruits and nuts come from California, right? No matter if you say that about Californians, the truth is we're very moderate Dems. Okay, so you look at California overall, like people are very moderate Dems. They're not hardcore tax and spend. They're not hardcore tax cutters. They're kind of in the middle. So they're not like out there trying to just like tax and spend, as much as they can. So, that's why I say, like these are both kind of half truths, right? Um, Supporters should acknowledge the negative consequences and be open at least to, even if it doesn't bring more money in. See, the money is a different question than some of these other uh, problematic things like how it affected the housing market, the fact that most of the money goes to very wealthy people, I mean, it's like, come on, like 50% of the tax savings go to households that are making $120,000 or more a year. I'm 42. My wife and I just barely crossed that threshold. Although, if you do our adjusted income, I don't think we make it there. So, I mean, just think about that. It's like, wow, and I'm not getting that much of it. I'm getting a little bit, but I'm not getting that much, right? It's quite frankly, it's boomers. You want to know who really benefited from Prop 13? Boomers who bought property in the 70s. That's who benefited. Like number one. So yeah, okay, boomer. No, I'm kidding. I'm just staying on top of the memology. I don't know, the meminess. I'm not sure how that goes. And detractors of Prop 13 need to acknowledge that California can live within the limits posed by Prop 13, although they rightly point to some of these negative consequences, right? So well, what should we do? This is a quick little review for you. Don't need to worry about that. Option one I put here more for our conservative friends because I do think it's really smart. I call this a revenue neutral approach to Prop 13. So California does have relatively high taxes. It's about eighth nationwide. Depends a bit on how you count. So, does California have high taxes? Yeah, but it's not crazy high, right? Um, and it's an expensive place to live. We're the fifth largest economy in the entire world. I mean, like we have money. California is incredibly wealthy. Like people are like, oh, we can't afford it. I'm like, you don't want to spend money. That's cool. I totally get it. I'm not opposed to that as a principled stance. But we don't have the money when like literally it's like a $3 trillion. No, it's like a $1 trillion economy. I think. I mean, that's so much money. You got to be kidding me, right? But that's neither here nor there. A revenue neutral approach would do this. It would allow the property tax rate to float up, but it would be counterbalanced with reductions in income and sales taxes. See, Professor Selby is smart. Okay. And this would help fix a lot of the other negative problems with Prop 13 without just jacking up taxes. So, that's a very reasonable thing. Um, so, there you go. We would call that rationalizing California's tax structure. It's just done in a smarter way. It's the same total amount coming in, but we're getting it in a smarter way. Soon, people have the opportunity, next year, in fact, people have the opportunity to vote on option two, which is the split roll property tax system. The split roll would do this. So one of the funny things about Prop 13 is it applies to residential property, houses that you and I own, but it also applies to business property. And no one really, it's like at the time they just like, oh, let's keep grandmothers in their houses and stuff. But a lot of very wealthy businesses are also getting a really sweetheart deal on their property taxes, and they're actually profitable businesses. You know what I mean? So getting that kind of sweetheart deal, a lot of Democrats think is problematic. So this is a kind of like Democrats for a long time have been trying to get this split roll idea going. But I mean, this is what it would do. It would keep Prop 13 for individuals. So me, your neighbor, all of that, like just the residential stuff will stay exactly the same. But it would revert commercial property taxes back to what? A market priced system. So I mean, fair enough, right? You're a business, you're making money, you can pay taxes based on market price. Okay. Um, uh, Somewhere between, so estimates vary. I put about 5 billion a year would be brought from this change. More recent estimates are actually higher than that. It's maybe 7 to 12 billion. We're not quite sure how much would come in based on this change. So that's a lot of money if you want to help fix California's budget in other ways, which is a lot better than it used to be, but it's still not perfect. This is a good way to do it if you wanted to do that. It doesn't hurt individuals. The amount that, anyways, just leave it at that. And then this is actually Professor Selby's preferred solution, but no one listens to me, so they're not going to do it. But this is how I would fix it. I would just have Prop 13 apply to one property per person or per business, right? Like my wife and I own a house that's our residential house that we live in. Let's let Prop 13 apply to that house. And if we have a rental house and we're making profit on our rental house, well, darn it, we can pay, a fair share of taxes on profit. We're making profit from the house. We can support, the house needs water, it needs fire, it needs police, all of that. So it's not crazy to do that. In fact, this would probably be not per couple, but per person. I think legally it would be hard to restrict it to married couples or something like that. So actually, my wife and I, we could each have a house. And then that third house is when you would start to pay market price, taxes on market price. That's probably higher than 5 billion as well. So my numbers here are probably a little bit off. It's somewhat of a dynamic situation. So that's a little bit of a long lecture. I get it, but look, Prop 13 is so, so, so important. And what's the three main things that it did that we have to keep in mind? It lowered taxes, definitely did. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But it also restructured California's tax base. We had a shift in where we get our money from. And then it created a big difference between new purchasers and old purchasers as far as their tax burden. Okay. And you know what? Like I said, I should just put it in here in the reading. It's the boomers. It's boomers who benefited by far more than anybody else. I'm a Gen X. If you were Gen X and you got in the like 90s, early 2000s, you benefited. I didn't get in. I did okay, but we didn't buy it till about like 5 years ago. Like I wasn't making a lot of money. So just keep that in mind as far as how 13 has affected California's system of governance.